Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the Textio LinkedIn Live event, Work Reimagined, How Leadership is Shifting. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hi, I'm Rocki Howard. I'm the founder of Diversiology.io and Senior HR Advisor at Textio. And today I am so excited, you all, to be here with the one, the only, the amazing Madison Butler. Such a powerful voice in rethinking leadership and creating workplaces rooted in empathy and human-centered values. And speaking of which, as you come in and join us today, please make sure to drop your LinkedIn link in the chat. Let's make sure we're connecting. And as you're coming in, I'm going to ask you a question. What's one way leadership should be reimagined to create a more impactful and inclusive workplace? What's one way you think leadership should be imagined? Just drop it in the chat as you're joining. Our conversation today is all about reimagining work. We're here because work as we know it needs to change. The way people lead needs to change. We're seeing shifts driven by the realities of remote work, the demand for greater flexibility, and a growing understanding that workplaces should support, not deplete the people in them. And with tomorrow's election on the horizon, it's a perfect time to reflect on what true leadership looks like in a world where courage, empathy, and inclusivity are more important than ever. So today, Madison and I are going to chop this up. We're going to discuss what this shift in leadership looks like, why it's happening now, and how we can create workplaces where people aren't just surviving, but truly thriving. And so let's start by setting the stage. Maddie, come on, introduce yourself to the audience. And while you're introducing yourself, I would love if you could tell everybody about the journey that brought you to this work. What inspired you and your commitment to building human-centered workplaces?
So my name is Madison Butler. My pronouns are she, her. I am the founder of Blue Haired Unicorn. I am a writer. I'm a speaker. I am also the CXO at a company based out of Austin called Grav. And so what that really means is I spend a lot of my time thinking about the experiences that humans have with our workplaces. At my company, I also think about the experience our customers are having with our workplaces. But overall, I am thinking about how people experience the world around us. When I think about my journey to getting here, it's always feels like kind of a loaded question because I didn't get here by in college. I was like, oh, I want to change the world, because in college you have no idea that work sucks yet. You might have a little bit of an idea, but you're not really quite sure at the capacity that it sucks. However, what it really was for me, I am a biracial woman. My mom is white, my dad is black. That came with a ton of identity issues growing up that I just wasn't quite sure how to navigate at the time. And what it really led to was me leaning into whiteness, because when you are growing up, that is what is centered to you as what success looks like. It's what you are seeing, whether it is in your teachers and your coaches and your peers. Especially, I'm from the Northeast. I went to boarding school. It was very white and male dominated. And so I leaned into those identities because I thought that's what I had to do to be A, likable, B, successful. And in that, I was also a pretty yucky person. I had really terrible thoughts about myself. My internalized anti-Blackness was gross, and also not only harmful to me, but harmful for all of the Black women and all of the Black folks that I encountered. Fast forward, when I was in my early 20s, I ended up in a really bad relationship, as I think a lot of us do. However, I was in a relationship with someone who was a very abusive, raging racist. And looking back, it's wild because I'm kind of a take no shit kind of lady. However, when you're in your 20s, you also don't know what relationships are supposed to look like, right? And so fast forward again, our breakup ended up on the news, and a clip of him went viral. And every time I say it, people are like, oh, it's that clip. It's that clip. It went viral right around the election of 2016. And he was just saying, all of the most racist, heinous things in the book about how Trump was going to send me back to Africa, drop the N-word several times. And again, being young and naive and in my 20s, I didn't know how the internet worked, right? So I had shared it on my Facebook and just said hey, a lot of people are voting out of this mindset. Like this is the mindset they are taking when they're casting their votes. And the next day I woke up and I had 400,000 views, and I was very unprepared for what that meant for me. And then all of a sudden it was on BuzzFeed, and it was on BET, and it was on, Occupy Democrats. And the only thing anyone knew about me and the only thing anyone wrote about me was that I was a Black woman. And so this identity that I had run so hastily from was the only thing anyone knew about me. And so it was a very, very public reckoning for myself on how the world shapes who we become and how we end up folding ourselves in the pretzels to people who at the end of the day only see your Blackness anyway. And so I say this, like, I am Black first. Like the first thing you know about me when I walk into a room is that I am Black. But it took that very public, gross reckoning for me to get to this place. And then it took me a couple years after that to realize, yes, I'd come to terms with my identity and really thrived in it, but I wasn't doing that at work, right? Like I was still coming to work and straightening my hair and wearing loafers and sounding a lot like this because it sounds more palatable. And that for me was when I realized, like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like I'm getting paid to be someone else's puppet, and that's not quite enjoyable. It is exhausting. And so that gives us a summary of how I ended up here today.
Well, and it's so amazing how many of us, unfortunately, lots of us can code switch and lots of us can cover, but you can't hide this, right? Like we are obviously Black women, and that's what leads, and that's how the world sees us. And so I can really understand your experience, and now going, how do I reconcile this in a place of work, and how do we make the experiences at work a little bit more human centered? And so I'd love to do a quick poll question with our audience, and I just want to ask people, like, when you think about the qualities, like, which of these qualities do you believe is most important for effective leadership in today's workplace, right? And so we've got a few. Drop what you think in the chat, because if we had a little bit more of this, maybe we wouldn't be twisting ourselves and not trying to center ourselves in a place where it doesn't work. And I did it in my professional life. I did it in my personal life. In the personal life, I remember, and I'm really blessed. I met the love of my life when I was 19. I've been married for 33 years. But the first Christmas that we shared, and I went to his house and met the family, right? I had my weave. It was popping, y'all. And I had green contacts, not even the hazel contacts, green contacts. And look, I am not criticizing anyone that shows up like that, because if you want to look like that, it's amazing. The problem is when you think you need to show up like that because that's your standard of beauty, and that is the standard of beauty that we've been centered on, and that's the only way we look good. That's the only way we fit well within the corporate culture as well. And I remember my husband saying, I'm just telling you now, you might be real cute, but my brothers are going to rip you up and down, because they just going to see through all of that. And the truth is, we do see through that. We want to see the authentic person. And so, Maddie, let's talk a little bit about that, right? Like, we're all feeling this moment of change right now. Like the expectation around leadership is evolving faster because people want to show up and be their own person. So, like, from your perspective, why now? Why does work need to be imagined right now?
Well, it's kind of like hindsight's 2020, but I think during COVID, so many of us were at home, right? And we were just working in our jammies, in our mess, in our anxiety. And a lot of us got to explore what life looks like when you don't just center work, right? Because now your kids are home from school. So like you're also prioritizing them, and your partner's home, and you're trying to figure out how the two of you are going to work together in a 1-bedroom apartment and also maybe not have to get divorced. And so in that, I think a lot of us realize like there is so much more going on in the world than work. And we are sold this really crappy dream that our entire lives are supposed to revolve around work. When in actuality, the only reason any of us come to work is to essentially support the other things in our lives that are much more important than work. Whether it is our families, our partners, our children, our goals. Like we come to work because essentially we have to, not because, I mean, yes, I love work, but would I do it for free? Probably not. I'm here because I have a mortgage and I have bills and I have a family that I have to support. And so in that, I think a lot of people realize the freedom to work while just being yourself makes you a lot more productive. If I am not consistently worried about, did I laugh hard enough? Did I talk too much in that meeting? Am I wearing the right blazer? Does this skirt make me look too thick? So now they think something of me and my body at work. Like when you take all of that out of the equation, how much better are we all at what we're doing? Because we're only focused on what we're doing. We're not focused on who we have to be while we're doing it. And so I think in that, a lot of us have learned to work differently. And now you're seeing a lot of companies who are, really going hard on the return to work. And now people are like, okay, well, how do I return to work and still balance all the things that become very important to me? Like I can tell you, I don't really have a desire to ever be back in an office full time because I have other things in my life that take up those 2 hours each way stuck in traffic. I get to go to the gym when I want and cook my meals and do all of these things that have become very important to my life and my livelihood. And in that, I think people are really starting to think about how has work been harmful and what has work kept me from accomplishing, even though work is supposed to be a thing that helps you accomplish. We were sold a really crappy dream and people want to reimagine it now.
Well, and you know what? That's so true. Like there is not enough money anyone could pay me to come and sit back in an office. And you know what? It's not because of some of the things that I do, although I do appreciate it. I like being able to get up and walk in the morning. I like riding my bike at night. I like being able to get off of work and walk down a set of stairs and see my husband and not have to drive an hour. I love all of those things. But you know what I love more? I love not having to be in an office and doing politics. I love not having to overthink how I show up in the office. I love not having to think about, is someone going to think about that I am the angry Black woman when I, address this situation very clearly and articulately. I don't want to have to think about some of the politics of it all that really center around the workplace cooler. And I think for me, it's about my mental health and well-being. And so, like, Maddie, do you think that leaders are really thinking about how they lead, especially when it comes to supporting health and well-being now?
I think yes and no. Like, I think there are tons of leaders who are self-aware enough to want to lead that way, but I think that's the key. Like, you have to be self-aware enough to know what you need in order to prioritize what anyone else needs. Like, if I have no idea where I'm at, I can't begin to imagine where my team is at or what an individual needs. And I think that is 100% the hardest part. Like, when people ask me, what's the hardest part about consulting? It's that moment. Like, you cannot force people to get it because at the end of the day, some people just don't care to get it, because we talked about this kind of in our pre-call. How many people are in leadership because they thought they had to be, not because they had like a raging passion for human-centric leadership or elevating their humans or elevating their team. It was because they wanted more money and this was the way to get more money. And again, going back to, we all go to work to make money. And so I think there's that great divide. There are people who have experienced bad leadership and they want to be a great leader now because they've seen what it's like to be with a bad one. And then there's the other side that they've only had bad leadership and so they mirror it because that's all they know. And then there are the people who just simply come to work to check the box and get their paycheck and they don't actually care about all the other frivolous stuff. And so I think you kind of have these three boxes that are kind of spread out all over the place. And I think the larger the company, the easier it is for bad leadership to kind of fall in the cracks. We know that leadership tends to manage up very well and manage down much poorly. And when you're at a company with 10,000 people, that is easy to go unnoticed. And so I think it is definitely really interesting when you look at different companies, see where their expectations lie in terms of leadership.
For sure. And I just want to call out a few of the comments that I see in the chat. Stephanie Chin, I love this. When we were asking the question about what traits, Stephanie talked about transparency, but she said, but even more so clarity. Leaders have to be clear to the audiences they communicate with. And leaders haven't always been taught to be clear. Mm-hmm. We haven't really trained our leaders to do this. I love Hector's comment. All of them hard to pick. I would say empathy, because if I had to choose, that would unlock so many other things. Like, Maddie, I'm guessing you and I both agree with that. Like, if you could actually take the time to empathize, it unlocks so many other things. And you will talk about this, about leaders being vulnerable and transparent. And so we'll get to that. And I love Sharon's comment. Leadership success and job performance are multifaceted. All of these things are important according to research, which is more predictive of success is dependent on the specific context. So I love all the comments. Keep the chat going. If you have questions, please drop them in. We'll try to get to them. So, Maddie, like, one of the most powerful shifts we're seeing is this move away from this traditional fear-based leadership model. Those structures that have been built on hierarchy and power and privilege and control and focus on short-term results. Like, people are over that. So I want to start and ask you this. I've got a couple of questions to ask you here, but I want to start with this. Like, what is the cost? Like, I want everybody to hear this. What is the cost of leading with fear?
Everyone's mental health. Like, if we all, I think I said this to you, if our companies are paying for mental health benefits, but then the people here are using the mental health benefits just to cope with working here, we should probably rethink how we're operating. And I've worked in a couple of workplaces where you had to be in therapy or heavily medicated or crying to be functional. And I just don't see a world in which that's productive. Because when I am fearful in any capacity, I'm not going to take risks. And we all know that innovation comes from risk taking. The best successes come from being able to fail. And if I am so fearful at all times of just existing, guess what? I'm not going to fail. I'm going to come in, I'm going to do my A plus B equals C every day until the cows come home, and I'm going to try nothing different. Because at the end of the day, I'm here to make my money and pay my bills. And if taking a risk makes that detrimental to my success here, then I'm not going to do that. And so for me, the cost not only is innovation, but it's people. And you and I know this, most businesses, our biggest cost center is people. And why we are so frivolous with our largest cost center is absolutely wild to me. That should be the number one thing that we are actively taking care of. The same way we take care of our inventory, the same way we take care of all of our tech and our compliance, we should be taking care of our people. And for some reason, we've decided in corporate America that people are expendable. They are replaceable. And you're right. In a world, they are. However, even if they are replaceable, are we saying that we're okay replacing you and I send you off worse than you came? Because that for me is a problem. I am happy to recognize that everyone has a life cycle at a company. Not everyone is meant to be there forever. But I'll be damned if you leave worse than you came. That is not my goal here. My goal here is to make sure that whenever you leave, whatever you leave for, I've set you up to be better and to know what work could and should feel like. And I think most companies have taken like the opposite approach. They're like, let me give you the worst experience. And so that way, when everyone else gives you worse ones, you're like, damn, they were so great.
We're so glad. You know, people don't always realize that or recognize that, because sometimes you're working for a place, we all get tired. To your point, it has a life cycle. And then you start going, oh, this is a crappy place to work. And then you go out there in the world and you're like, oh no, that wasn't crappy. Here's what real crappy looks like. Mm-hmm. And I so agree with that shout out that you said. Like, if we have to have the benefit to work here, I literally worked for a place and I was working for someone, and that person and this person yelled at me and treated me like so badly. And I had to go back into therapy, and I thought, this is ridiculous. And so, you know, ultimately I left. And so you are forcing people to leave too, because people have a lifespan for which they will put up with your bullshit. Like, let's just do it. People leave. They may not, like, there are moments with the way you treat people that when you go sit back at your desk and you go, ooh, I went too far, you should also go, that's the moment that this person quit. They may not have left today, but that's the time that they quit. And so we really need to come back to this place of human-centered leadership, right? And so, like, we've got to stop checking these boxes. We've got to stop having values that sit on a wall someplace and we don't bring them into the organization. We don't live them. We don't have people hold themselves accountable to our values. So, Maddie, you just said some amazing things. Tell us, what are some of the signs that a company is genuinely embracing human-centered leadership?
So I think it kind of goes back a little bit to what I was saying is when you take this stance that, well, it's just business, don't be offended. That's not real. That's not real. And so for me, as a business, if you care about your people and how they operate outside of your workplace, and know that how they operate outside of your workplace is directly linked to how they're treated in your workplace, that is human-centered leadership. Because at the end of the day, it's like you said, if you have that moment where you're like, dang, I took it a step too far, you probably did, but it also means that that person is taking that not only to their next workplace, but they're taking it to their friendships, their family, their partnerships. Trauma doesn't go away at 5 o'clock when we clock out. That's not how it works. It is, you don't have, I don't have work Maddie and then real life Maddie. I just have Maddie. And all of the things I experience inherently impact how I show up in every experience I have. And so human-centered leadership really means that I care how I treat you because I know that that shows up in the rest of the way that you live. And that also means that I'm willing to recognize that some days you have moments that are bigger than work, and I have to let life happen because life is messy and we don't get control over it. There's no good timing. We know nothing happens in good timing. But when terrible things are happening in people's lives, as managers, I think it is woefully selfish to say, well, just like pack that away and come to work from 8 to 5 and send your happy little emails and send your happy little Slacks and pretend that's not happening, because that is just not the real world. And human-centered leadership cannot pretend that everyone can just email their way through trauma.
I love this. We can't pretend that everyone can email their way through trauma. And I think the other thing for people who want the ROI on the other side of it is this. If you work for a place who meets you halfway when you are going through those tough moments, if you're working for a place where you know you can have a bad day, if you're working for a place where you know you can show up and go, the world is pretty crappy right now, and I'm having a tough time processing this, that's a place you're gonna want to stay. That's a place that you're like, look, it may not be perfect, but I'm proud to work here, and I can work through some of the things that we go through because I know that they genuinely and authentically care about me. So I'd love to ask this question to our audience. Do you think your organization is genuinely embracing a shift? It may not be like a hard right, but do you think your organization is genuinely embracing a shift towards a more human-centered approach? I'd love to see the answers there. And Maddie just gave us like one of those things that help you look through the lens and think about it. Maddie, remote work has shifted so much about how we lead. Right? You mentioned this earlier. And those traditional strategies, they just don't work in a remote first world. So, like, what do you think leadership needs to look like to fully support teams who may never have set foot in the same office, who may have never met each other or touched each other or given each other a hug? I remember when we first went remote at the company I was working with, when COVID hit and someone said, like, what are we going to do without the Rocki hugs? Like, we don't know. Like, human beings like to be in spaces together to connect. So how do we create that connection? What do leaders need to do now?
So I think one of the things that I have found works really well is creating time together that isn't centered around a task or a goal, but creating time where it's just we chat. Like, I know in my one-on-ones, I spend usually the first half just talking about you as a human, because I would do that if we were in the office, except it would be like on my way to the bathroom or when I see you in the cafeteria or whatever, but those things aren't happening. And so creating space for actual human connection that is not just centered around, okay, here's what I need you to do. Here's how I need you to prioritize XYZ metrics. And then also as a team, bringing people together for things that, again, aren't work-centered, that you maybe don't even talk about work, but you have moments to just connect as human beings. Paired with, again, I think the world is a little messy. It's a little bit on fire. And as a leader, being willing to be vulnerable with the things that you're feeling and experiencing so that your team also feels like they can say what they're feeling and experiencing, especially like, I have this thing, for my team, like if you need to like hit the button where like you need to step away, that's okay. But I just want you to tell me that you want to step away, because we know that if people don't say they're going to step away, they're just going to quiet PTO it. I would much rather be aware of what I need to pick up, because if there's a ball dropping, and I want to give people the safety and the freedom to say like, hey, today is a bad day, whether it's the news or family stuff, whatever it is, I need to walk away and step away for a moment. I want people to have the space to do that. And I think as a leader who's trying to prioritize the shift, you have to be willing to be in touch with your own needs so that you can understand the needs of your team.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're so right. Like, you have to not only be able to say that to people, but you have to create the psychological safety. And I know some people think that that word is like played out. I particularly don't. I think psychological safety is very important. I think the reason why we think it's played out is because we don't want to talk about it and we don't know how to create it. And so we've got to create, we can't just say we do it and then there's those subtle repercussions behind it where, you know, if you actually do it, there's like a little checkbox next to your name, which is why it's important that leaders model the behavior, right? And so important. And so I'm going to ask this question. We've got a poll coming to the chat. In a remote or hybrid work environment, which aspects of leadership do you think is most challenging? And Maddie, you just talked about like building trust and encouraging open communication. And we've got a couple others, supporting mental health and creating that sense of belonging, right? Is there anything else you want to add there?
So I actually think one of the hardest parts about this is showing your own weaknesses as a leader. I think we, especially in leadership, have been shown that any kind of weakness is failure. Emotions are failure. When emotions are really normal and human, and we see them at work all the time, but for some reason we're told that they're bad. And so I think one of the hardest parts as a leader is showing when I have weaknesses or when I have flaws or when I just have gaps or when I'm having a bad day myself. I find it very hard as a leader to say that. And I have been practicing for a very long time because it's just that I have to be able to model the behavior. If I never step away, why would my team feel like they can step away? And so being willing to own where I have messed up and say sorry when I do, but also showing that I do have emotions and I'm a real person who has lived experiences outside of the workplace, I think for me has actually been very hard because I also feel like as a Black woman, I'm supposed to just be on all the time. I'm supposed to be resilient and strong and go get them. And that's just not who I want to be anymore. And for me, that has actually been the hardest part. It's not necessarily about giving that space to my team because I've always kind of been that person. I want you to take all the space and feel good about being on a team with me. But I think showing my own weaknesses is much harder.
You know what, though, because it's associated with shame. Like we've brought, we turn it weakness. We talk about, so we've moved from emotions, which should be okay, and then emotions are accompanying shame because again, we're chasing this model of what leadership should look like. That's not human centered. So I'm going to tell you all something funny. My new obsession is the new Matlock series. If you all haven't seen it, catch it. It's Kathy Bates as a lead. Like, how often do you see a 75-year-old leading the call sheet on a show, right? So you got Kathy Bates, you got this multicultural, multi-generational cast. It's witty, it's whatever. But I love this quote she said last week, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but I'm going to come close. And she was talking to somebody who was ashamed of something, and she said, you know what? I've done my time with shame. I love shame, but at 75, I don't have time for that bitch, right? Like, we have got to leave shame alone, and we've got to model that for people and know that being human isn't something to be ashamed about. I love, you know, what you said. Life is messy. So, Maddie, something else you talk about, which I love, is like you've been really vocal about the dangers of hustle culture. And I think this comes in with the shame piece because, like, if I'm not like really hustling all day, 24 hours, I'm not showing my value, I'm not proving my worth. And especially for strategically underrepresented people who have a tough time like earning the seat, you don't want to lose the seat when you get it. And so there's been this mindset that tells us that we have to keep doing more, producing more, often at the cost of our well-being. So can you talk about, like, I'm just going to say, you talk about hustle culture, because I know you've got some things to say. What's the real cost? And how can leaders start creating space for rest and balance without feeling like they're sacrificing performance?
So the cost is you, right? How many of us have missed out on moments, experiences, whatever, vacations, because I had to check my phone. I had to be online. I had to be present. I had to be there. And it costs us time with the people who mean the most to us. And again, I love everyone I work with, but they're not my family, right? Like I'm a big, like, work is not family kind of lady. They're not my family. They're not my partner. They're not my mom. They're not my grandparents. And the one thing I've learned about life is this all ends. This all ends. And I refuse to be the person who was like, dang, I wish I had worked less because I missed out on time with my grandparents. I missed out on moments with my partner. I missed out on a sunset, whatever it is. Because no one is like, dang, I wish I logged into Slack more. No, that's not the case. And as a Black woman, I feel like I'm always up against my last accomplishment, right? Like the last best thing I did is slowly on my heels. And it's been really hard to put that down because I used to get like very overwhelming anxiety when I would not be like, when I would just be chilling, like watching TV. I'd be like, I need to be doing something. Like I could multitask right now. I feel like I have to be. And I don't know. I just had this year for me. Like I posted on Threads yesterday, like I've spent the entire year being in love and offline. Maybe that's a little bit of it, is like I've just really prioritized like wanting to be loved and wanting to have a soft life. And work is lovely and work loves me, but work does not love me in the same way that my family loves me. And I moved back home, not because I really missed the snow, but I realized that I was going to miss out on moments that I wasn't going to get back. And I can always fly to Texas for work, but I don't want to have to fly home because of an emergency.
Yeah.
And really just unpacking what that meant. And I also think it's made my skin better. I have prioritized seeing the world. I have prioritized actually logging off the internet. I've prioritized my health, and now I can pick up very heavy things. But at the end of the day, the cost is you. And if that's something that you're cool with, then I can't get you there. But for me, I was tired of missing out on the people I loved and having regrets about it afterwards. I remember during COVID, this is actually probably when it started to shift for me. I'm a dog lady, like dog lady. And at the time I had 6. So 6 is a lot for anyone who's asking. But I have this dog who I had found right before COVID, and she had a puppy like immediately. And the puppy was always like very sickly and very cute, but sickly. And she got really sick during COVID. And my partner at the time brought her to the vet. And the vet basically was like, there's nothing we can do. Like, we have to put her to sleep. And my job at the time did not let me leave to go say goodbye to my dog. And I have lived with a lot of regret in my life. And that is a very, very big one for me. And one that I was like, I will tell the next person who tells me I can't do something where they can go and how they can get there and how fast. And that just completely changed my perspective, because those are things I don't get to get back. But the regret that I feel, even though that may seem minor to a lot of people, is very big for me. But what if that had been my parent or my partner or anyone else that, again, monumental meaning to my life? And so for me, hustle culture just doesn't win, because it will run you into the ground every time. You cannot out hustle capitalism. Capitalism is the ultimate hustler, and it will take you to your breaking point. Because how many of us have had the moment that's like, well, when I just get that title, I'll be good. I'll chill out. Yeah. When I get that salary, I'll be good. I'll chill out. No, you don't chill out, because you get that salary and you're like, how do I make more? Because now, of course, my cost of living has gone up or whatever. And you're like, it's constant, and it's built that way. It is built to break you.
It is built to break you.
The longer you participate, the longer you let yourself get run over. I'm done getting run over.
For sure. I love that. I want to call out Hector's comment, because Hector said, attaching your sense of identity and self to your job is dangerous and harmful. It took me a long time to learn that, but I will tell you the hardest lessons that both my husband and I learned is both of our fathers we lost. And what was so, like, the thing that I hold with me all the time is these are both men who worked 2 or 3 jobs for their independent family to take them from lower middle class to middle class, to provide access to privileges that they didn't have. And they worked really hard. Both of our fathers did it. And here's the truth, that then when it came time for them to retire, their bodies were so used up that we lost them. And they were both looking forward to retiring and spending time with their grandchildren and actually living the life that they had worked so hard to live. Guess what? By the time that they had finished working their life, there was no life left for them to live. And so that's one of the things that I hold on to as a recovering workaholic, to be able to go, I don't want to wake up and be like, I've missed it. I've missed it. Like this, the human centered goal that you have, I'm so busy with it that I've missed it. And so I think that that is spot on. So I'm going to drop a question in the chat. Which of these is your biggest challenge in achieving work-life balance? Now, I put that question there very loaded because I don't think work-life balance is work-life balance. Maddie, we can have a whole nother conversation on just that. We could spend 45 minutes on that, but for the sense of the question, we put it there. Here's another thing that I think when our identities are tied to work, that can be very dangerous for leaders. And I think human-centered leaders need to understand this. Like, feedback is another area where leaders really have the chance to make or break an employee's experience. And for underrepresented groups, feedback can have even deeper impact, often reinforcing harmful stereotypes. I've certainly been given feedback that, I'm a little bit too aggressive. Well, that leads right into that angry Black woman stereotype. And so, Maddie, I'd love for you to share, like, how do you think leaders can be more mindful when giving feedback to ensure it builds people up and that they're thinking about the whole human and not just that thing that they need to give feedback on?
So one, I think if we zoom out a little to performance reviews, I think performance reviews in general are like fairly biased because we all operate in recency bias of whether we like to admit it or not. And so I actually think one of the best ways to give feedback that is mindful and helpful, and more importantly, actionable, is feedback more often that is trackable somewhere. So that way when you're writing these reviews, you have notes. You're not just thinking about the best thing, the most recent thing I did, whether it be really good or really bad, but you have like documented notes. Who would have thought about it? If you can measure it, you can grow it. The other thing that I think about is, before you give someone feedback, is this actionable? Can I give them a plan on how to operationalize this? Because I once got feedback that was I needed to smile more. Is that actionable? No, it's not. You can't put a process in place for me to smile more. And so as we're giving feedback, thinking about, is this actionable or is this up in the air? Is this like a solid fact or is this something that I'm feeling about this person? I cannot do anything with how leaders feel about me. What I can do is I can think about metrics, KPIs, and the actual tasks that go with my job duties and my performance and give them feedback on that. Now, that being said, you can also give people feedback on how they show up in rooms. And I don't mean that in like a smile more or have a better attitude kind of way. But sometimes people just need like the push of like, hey, you can speak up, or hey, you should have asked that question then, there, and in the moment. But majority of the time when you hold a marginalized identity, when you're getting feedback, it's like, the way you approach that was really aggressive. And then you have to ask the question, am I aggressive or am I Black? And they never have an answer for that. So when we're giving feedback, making sure that it is not only actionable, but it's not coming from a place of feeling, but it's coming from a place of fact.
Oh my goodness. I wish I had my girl Tara Turk Haynes has a set of t-shirts she's done where she's like, feelings aren't facts. I almost want to go run and get my feelings aren't facts t-shirt. T, we're going to give you a shout out today. I appreciate that perspective. I will just tell you all, I'm going to celebrate with you all. I think I just dropped it in the chat. I just had my first article published on Harvard Business Review. Yes. And it is about performance, and it does have like tangible, actionable things that you can do to be more human-centered and more effective in terms of performance. And it's backed with a lot of the Textio data. So it's in the chat. Y'all check it out, please. Maddie, I know we're creeping up on time, but I didn't want to lose this because earlier we were talking about vulnerability and leadership? What does it mean for leaders to lead with vulnerability? And how can they embrace that a little bit more?
So I think for a long time, and again, this is probably because we lived in male-centered capitalistic organizations for a very long time, is that we were taught to lead with the idea that nothing is ever wrong. We know everything. I know more than you. That's why I'm in this role. And just do as I say, maybe not as I do. And as a leader, I think the most vulnerable thing you can do, the most powerful thing you can do, is admit that people on your team are better at a lot of stuff than you are. I can't do a lot of the things the people on my team can do. Want to know why? Because IT reports to me, and I can barely use my printer. You can ask IT themselves. But as a leader, being willing to admit that you've also had challenges, you have also had struggles, you also still struggle, I think is incredibly powerful. When you humanize yourself, you humanize your team. When they get to view you as another human who goes through the same mess they do, rather than that person who tells them what to do, shows no empathy, does nothing except show up and say, hey, do this thing and let me know when it's done. When you show that you are also human, you allow people to trust you. And people do their best work when they feel safe enough to trust the environment they're in. And that, for me, is the power of being vulnerable. Like, yeah, go ahead, lead with fear, but just know everybody hates you. And if you're cool with that, you're cool with that. But it is not the makings of a good leader, and it is not the makings of someone who is good at developing their teams. And at the end of the day, I do this because I love the people that I work with, and I want them to be more successful, richer, better off, better equipped than I ever was in my career. And I care deeply about that. But I will say there's lots of leaders who don't care, and they could come to this conversation. They'll think it's silly because it doesn't matter to them. It's the same thing with anti-racism, DEI. You can have these conversations all day, but there are some people who just do not care. And unfortunately, they will exist in our organizations forever.
You know what, though? It's so important. And I want to say this, like, and look, there are some people in this thread in chat that I know have worked with me, who have technically worked for me. I hate that term. And so y'all can put it in the chat. I show up real messy. I show up real authentic. I don't think you can call yourself a leader until you hire people who are better at doing things than you are better than doing it. But they can drop it in the chat. I don't think that any of the people saw me as less than because I was vulnerable and I shared what I couldn't do, or that they were better than. In fact, those things usually lead to connection conversations where we can learn from each other. So I think what you just said is absolutely amazing. Maddie, before we get out of here, let's get practical. If you could give people one specific action that leaders can take today to start that shift to being more human-centered with their team, to have a more human-centric approach, what would that be?
Oh man, it's the same answer for a lot of the things I talk about, but you have to get really good at having really awful, crappy conversations with yourself. Because if you are not willing to have the hard conversations with yourself, you're certainly not ready to have them with your team. But you have to, A, dial into what you need, but B, dial into the experiences that you've created and own where you've caused harm. And it doesn't mean that you have to go on an apology tour. But it is so impactful as a leader to know where you've messed up, because the only way we get better is when we acknowledge where we've been. And that is the hang up for so many people, because none of us want to say we were a bad leader, because then that defines us. Because we talked about this. We live in a world where everyone thinks everything is binary and black and white. You're a good leader or you're a bad leader. Instead, you're just a leader who's going to do bad things. You're going to do good things forever. You're never going to get it completely right. But luckily, you're never going to get it completely wrong. Have hard conversations with yourself and call yourself out and call yourself in. That is where it starts. I could say that it's a checklist of things that you can go do with your team, but at the end of the day, if this work isn't happening at home, then it's kind of all smoke and mirrors. And this is an everyday, every moment process. There's no day where you like reach leadership ascension and you're the perfect leader. Sorry, hate to break it to you. You have to practice this every day in your leadership career forever. And that's okay. I'm a lifelong learner. For me, that is very, very invigorating, that I always have more to learn and more to do and more to be better at. For some people, that's very disheartening. Whichever way you take it, that for me is the step, is getting really, really clear with yourself on who you are and who you need to be and how you need to show up. Because if you don't know how you need to show up or how your body wants to show up, it will be really hard to say that you want everyone else to show up how they are, because you're not doing that with them either.
My goodness. Call yourself in, call yourself out. Leaders, that's how we reimagine work and how leadership is shifting. Maddie, this is like a dream come true to be able to do this with you. I'm so excited. I learn from you all the time. I appreciate you. Thank you everyone for joining us. Reimagining work and shifting how we lead is not easy. Like Maddie said, you've got to practice it every day, but it is essential. And this is our opportunity to create workplaces where everyone feels valued, where rest and well-being are foundational, and where every voice is heard. I believe we change the world one story, one conversation, one action at a time. And I'm betting Maddie's story, her conversations, and her insights reminded us that leadership is more than a title. It's a commitment to humanize work, to show up with empathy, to create spaces where everyone can thrive. Maddie, you changed my world a little bit today, and I appreciate you. I want to say to everybody that joined us, thank you so much to Textio for not only sponsoring this time in this conversation between Maddie and I, but for showing up every day. If you all haven't tried it, make sure to visit Textio.com for a demo, or reach out to hellotextio.com with any questions. They are building products for the future of human-centered workplaces. Maddie, where can people find the Blue Haired Unicorn newsletter? How can they sign up?
You can subscribe to my newsletter right through my LinkedIn. If you have any questions, slide in my DMs, and you can also find me on all the other socials at Corporate Unicorn.
Very cool. Watch for more collaborations between Maddie and Textio, and I'll be here. And I can't leave this platform without reminding people tomorrow is election day. Please go out, use your voice, and vote. And with that, everyone, make it an awesome, productive, and impactful week. Take care.
Bye.